Well, grace to you all and peace in the name of the God who is, who was, and who is to come. My name is Steve Shusett, and I am the resource staff and stated clerk of the Presbytery of the Highlands. And related to our meeting tonight, this General Assembly Town Hall, I was also a committee assistant and observer at the General Assembly. Not that I plan to contribute much from those roles, but if anybody has a question on that stuff, I'm glad to answer it. And I am thrilled to be able to introduce to you the commissioners to the General Assembly this year from Highlands Presbytery. We have Craig Barth, ruling elder from Morristown, Robin Palmer Burton, teaching elder, Highlands Presbyterian Church in Long Valley, Rich Gelson, teaching elder, Pilgrim Presbyterian Church in Phillipsburg, and Alec Jane, ruling elder, Morris Plains Presbyterian Church. It is great to have the four of you, and it is great to have all of the rest of you with us. And as you know by now, this is being recorded so that other folks can learn what there is to learn in the days and weeks ahead. So let us begin, as we are called to begin everything, with a word of prayer. God of prophets and apostles, you have chosen leaders to guide your people in the way of Jesus Christ. We thank you that in our day you are still claiming us for special work within the church. And tonight we are especially grateful that Craig and Alan, Robin, and Rich accepted this invitation to serve your church in a way unique in all our long history. As we lifted them and all General Assembly commissioners up in prayer before they began, asking that they be surrounded by affection and hope, blessed with wisdom and confident of your love, now we ask the same for all of your church, gathered in this blessed and particular way known as the Presbyterian Church, USA, as we all begin the process of discernment to pray and speak and act on those decisions soon before us. May we have open minds and open hearts to listen and courage enough to act. May it be so in your name and to your glory. Amen.
Amen.
So for our evening together, I have a series of questions that I'll be asking the commissioners to answer. And at the end of that, we will open up the floor to receive any questions you might have. And so if you have any, you might jot them down until we get to that point in the evening's festivities. But for now, I have a question to start with Robin. Let's begin at the beginning. What led you to pursue the nomination to become a General Assembly commissioner? And had you done this kind of thing before?
Yes, I've been very lucky. 10 years ago, I went to Detroit as a commissioner, and I have to say it was one of the highlights of my life to be able to represent my presbytery, which was West Virginia at that time, and to be a part of all of it. As my daughter-in-law says, that I am a kind of parliamentarian nerd. And so I love watching all that. And as we were, amending and minority report and this and that, like, I think that's exciting. Many of us come from small churches, so being able to be in worship with 1,000 people, I also find very uplifting and really enjoyed that also. So that's a little bit about who I am and why I opted to apply again to serve as a commissioner. I'd do it every year if I could.
Thanks, Robin. Craig, how about you?
Well, this is my second go round as a GA commissioner. First time was from our predecessor, Presbytery of Newton, back in 2012. So it was 12 years ago. And I just felt the calling to hop in again. I was hungry for connectionalism, I guess you would say, and especially because the past two General Assemblies were kind of, I don't know, not fully connected in one way, shape, or form. I I felt my health is good, my motivation, and I just felt called to go, and I'm just delighted and honored that my constituents in the Presbytery of the Highlands felt that I should. So I enjoyed it immensely.
Thank you, Craig. Rich, what led you to pursue being nominated, and do you have any previous experience with this?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Once again, just so thankful to have been elected for this. I am already excited to put my name in for consideration in 2 years. I just had so what led me to it was two things. That connectionalism that Craig said he was craving. I was definitely craving. I didn't grow up in the church, so I didn't have anything formative early on in terms of Sunday school or mission trips or youth groups or anything. It wasn't until I started working at Camp Johnsonburg. And that impression, that unity in Christ through diversity that celebrated every child of God, full value, was so important to me and so formative for me and has been through these years, and it's been 25 years now, and that seemed like a good time to have an experience that I've never had before in the presbytery since I've been a leader for those years. And I was just super excited to be with Presbyterians. I have a strong trust in our polity and the work of the Holy Spirit and our representative nature. And with all of the cultural conflicts everywhere, I was really excited to hear people lifting up Jesus and sharing their freedom of conscience, but in a way that was very unifying and very empowering. So I was excited, and now I'm excited again to put my name in the future. So thank you all.
Thank you, Rich. Alec?
So, this is my second time for the General Assembly. My first time was 2020 during COVID, and the reason why I wanted to participate in the General Assembly again was really I had felt that the 2020 the year during COVID, I felt like I didn't get enough. Everything was virtual. It was the first time that it was a General Assembly that was completely virtual, and it was sort of watered down. So the reason why I, um, I wanted to do this again is really to, and just I guess it's part of my spiritual journey, and I've sort of embarked in the second stage of my life that I'm heavily involved in the presbytery. I try to volunteer for anything and everything. My wife thinks I'm crazy, but I try to get involved as much as I can. And this is part of one of the things that I felt a calling for me to continue this spiritual journey, learn more, learn about the sort of the rules a little bit more, learn a little bit about how sitting in Morris Plains, I have a global impact on the presbytery and my spiritual journey. So kind of like Rich, I was super excited, even with all the chaos of travel that everybody had. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. I learned probably a lot of things that I wouldn't even know to ask questions on, but I got a chance to learn a lot about it. I still have a lot of questions myself, and a lot of sort of self-education myself as well. And I, like Rich, I am also looking forward to kind of continuing this journey as we evolve into the future General Assembly. So, thank you.
Thank you, Alec. As both Craig and Alec alluded, This General Assembly was different than any other General Assembly. Um, During the pandemic, and since then, it's been one experiment after another, honestly. During COVID in 2020, it was all online, as Alex said, so that was his experience. Then in 2022, the committees were in person, but the plenary, which is when all the commissioners are together, um, really or virtually, that happened um, online. And then this time, the committees were all online, and the plenary, everybody met in Salt Lake City. And because decisions on these big convention events has to happen so early, we already know that the next assembly will be in Milwaukee, and we know that it will be committees online and plenary in person in Milwaukee. So it's all been very different. So my question for all of you, and starting with Craig this time, is what was it like preparing for General Assembly, given all these dynamics? How did you get ready? And you might think about the technology issues, the normal process of reading the overtures for your committee, but also the overtures for the whole General Assembly. Um, what it was like having committee gatherings before you could actually even meet as a committee, but as a way to prepare and develop some kind of relationship. So if any of those things jump out at you, the main thing is, what was it like preparing for this?
Well, the top answer is that although the technique of preparing was different, now I'll say how it was different in a moment, the actual level or depth or time invested to prepare was about the same, in the sense of you have to read overtures regardless. You have to come prepared. Now, the venue may be your laptop computer screen rather than a committee room, but the degree of preparation was the same. I think the fact that we both as a Presbyterian and hopefully we as a nation have gotten a bit more accustomed to the Zoom technique, that although the committee work was not exactly the same doing it over Zoom than doing it in person, I felt a skill or facility in doing so. We had two get together sessions as a committee where all we talked about was what's our favorite holiday, what's our favorite color, what's our favorite food and why, and going around the 35 fellow committee members and trying to make bondings and connections on Zoom. It's not quite the same, but I think they were cognizant of that challenge and did their best to try to do some personal bonding. We also had a training session about basically how to use my GA and PC Biz, which again was online. I'm thankful I didn't have to, quite frankly, Steve, nothing personal, but I'm thankful I didn't have to go to the presbytery office to have those training sessions. but there was training for that. And then the other thing that I certainly for a first time commissioner and to a certain extent myself, we had training sessions on how to use the voting process, the MyGA panel, which commissioners utilize both during our committee sessions as well as in the plenary. Did that work 100% of the time? No, but it worked sufficiently that we got our work done, and everybody, both in the virtual committee as well as in the plenary session, was very patient. During my committee, we had a 45-minute freeze of the screen, And I just went and got a second lunch and a couple cookies. And when they were back online, I was back with them. But we've been accustomed to times and places where technology hasn't worked 100% of the time. But I'm especially considering the financial savings of having us all home and doing our committee work from home, although not ideal. I'm glad that the Committee on Office of General Assembly advised and basically we voted to have this same format in Milwaukee as well.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you. Rich, what was preparation like for you? Anything to add to what Craig's had to say?
Well, the first thing I had to do, because I was a little overwhelmed. We as a solo pastor, we're kind of a little bit siloed. So I was a little bit overwhelmed by the amount of overtures that I had to read, and it's my nature to feel like I have to not only read through them, but also start my own notebooks and take notes. And once I got over the fact that that's not going to happen, it was not possible for me to master the content and to just get comfortable being reasonably familiar, have some idea of how I was discerning the will of the Spirit through the work. It was good preparation. And but the MyGA portal was easy to use and excellent. And the PC Biz, everything was right there. And I am incredibly grateful for the really incredibly good work of the Presbyterian Outlook. That was my other companion, was reading about summaries there as well. So the prep was comfortable. Once I got over the fact that I'm not going to be fully prepared. And the committee work, I'm used to being online, but my committee was 53 people. A Zoom with 53 people is not easy. We spent one day on one overture, so about 7 hours on one overture. But again, it worked. And it is certainly the smarter, cost-effective way to go. So I'm glad we're repeating the format the next time.
Thank you, Rich. Alec?
I guess to continue what Craig and Rich were discussing, the prep work was pretty thorough. Our committee, kind of like what Craig, we had some social gatherings, but we were encouraged to have offshoot gatherings as well, individually, which we did. So essentially, sort of being sort of new to a lot of the overtures and I was part of the ordination committee, so I was kind of fascinated about what was going on and how things are being affected throughout the United States and whatnot in regards to ordination and the challenges with that. I found myself reaching out to some of the sort of the senior folks on the committee that had a lot of insight and experience, and really, aside from what I'm reading, aside to kind of get the, sort of the sense of what it means behind the words and how I can add value to that. So we did something a little bit different because we had a committee of 60 plus people. So we did have a social gathering that was, not scheduled formally. So our committee chair did set up a social gathering for us to meet in person when we all got to Salt Lake City. So I thought that was great. She found an hour and a room at the convention center where we had soft drinks and water and whatnot, and got to really meet people face to face, and especially the 3 or 4 people that I'd been sort of chatting with throughout through our committee meeting. So it was great when the personal touch came into it. As far as the preparation, I think I over prepared because I thought I needed to know a lot about it, because I didn't know I thought I needed to be an expert going into the committee meeting, and so I had a lot I had a lot to say and a lot to discuss and a lot of questions. But when I soon realized that I over prepared, it was kind of smooth sailing from there. So I think as long as you know the topic, understand and review them, and have some talking points, I think it's helpful. I think in lieu of being in person and virtual, I think it is really important, and to be able to voice. A lot of times when you're not in person, people kind of in technology hide behind the Zoom, because there's so many people, and I'm sure there was some of that on our committee as well. But I found myself raising my hand often, asking a little bit more questions. It made our committee meetings longer, but usually in a group setting, if you're the one that has a question, there's probably 5 other people that have that same question. So it was well put together. The committee chair kept everything in cadence. There was plenty of experts that if we were challenging some of the questions or whatnot, there was plenty of experts available for the committee to bounce stuff off of, and what are the rules and etc. So that was kind of my experience, and I thought the virtual committee meetings and the in-person combo was an excellent. I work full time, so this was a great way for me to have a lot of preparatory work and go into a live setting, and I think if you kind of understand that process, I think a lot of people, elders particularly in our presbytery, probably could commit this time with having a hybrid and an in-person meeting as well. So that was my input.
Thank you, Alec. Robin.
Well, I know we have a lot more to discuss, so I don't want to belabor this because they've all shared a lot. The one thing that I appreciated was there was town halls for us ahead of time if you chose to be a part of it, where people would talk about some of the more controversial issues or possible controversial issues. So you had a chance to get a little bit more information. They're also recorded so that you could watch them at a lot later time if you weren't able to be. A couple differences in 10 years. 10 years ago, these big boxes of stuff started arriving at your house for you to read through, and then you had to cart all of them with you. Now everything was online, so that was much easier. And 10 years ago when I was there was the first time we had electronic voting. And it was for me to see how it has translated over the years, and just how much more efficient it is and things like that. So that was exciting to see for it. But there was a lot of information available for training if you felt like you needed it. We had stuff that we could do on our own that we were required to do, but you could do them at your leisure, and it didn't really take that long. So I wouldn't be nervous about going that you can't get it all done or understand it, because there's a lot of opportunities for preparation.
Thank you, Robin.
Steve, can I just jump in with just one more addition in terms of the committee process?
If you can keep it short, yes, please.
Okay. Kudos to the 5 staffers that were assigned to each of the committees. We had a moderator, a vice moderator, an equity person, a parliamentarian, and a Zoom specialist. And they were on every 5 different people on every different committee, just whose sole purpose was to make sure the committee process on Zoom worked. And kudos to all of them.
Thank you. Before we go on to the next question, Craig segues well into the whole idea of equity support managers, which was new for this General Assembly. At the last General Assembly, they introduced something called equity primes, which we could have a whole Thursday night event just talking about that. But the idea of that and the equity support person was to make sure that so many of the things we don't think about, we think about. So Why is it that someone might call on teaching elders more often than ruling elders? Well, they may just have a bias to, you call on the pastor types. Well, the equity person is there to go, you've called on 4 teaching elders in a row. You really need to call on some ruling elders. All sorts of other things, whether we're being mindful of someone's language or not. In the committee that I was the committee assistant, we were the only committee with 3 languages. So we had translators translating what they were saying and translating for them. So that meant with 3 languages, we had 4 additional people. And we were the only committee that had a non-native English speaker as the moderator. And so she had a translator attached at the hip, because while she could manage on one-on-one, but Zoom is a different animal. And so really the assembly is learning, we're growing, the world is different. And for all of the challenges Zoom presents, simultaneous translation does not happen in the real world without significant technology and capacity. And that was really a wonderful thing to see up close and personal. Knowing that we do want to get questions from our audience, and I'm prepared for us to be here till 8:30 or 9, depending on when someone starts to sag over from fatigue. But you were each on a committee. 2 of you were on committees that had business from Highlands Presbytery before you. I did not, those 2 people, I didn't prep you in advance by saying, do your homework, be ready to talk about those. But if each of you could share what committee you were on, a particular highlight of your business, and if your business included something from Highlands Presbytery, so that would be the Committee on Preparation for Ministry Review, or the 2 environmental actions. If you could share something about those things, but keep in mind, if we could keep our answers as succinct as possible, that'll allow more time for questions to come. And not to put you on the spot, Rich, but you're next to start.
Thank you. I was on the Ecumenical and Interfaith Partnerships Committee. We did not have any business from our presbytery on that committee. And it basically, asked the question in lots of different forms, who has a seat at Christ's table? And, while we are quick to say everybody, but then you start asking, who do we want present, for example, as an ecumenical advisory delegate? Do we want to have, like in our committee, we had some discussion about whether or not to invite the Roman Catholic bishops to be representatives at the next GA. And so the question of, is it good to have representatives there, listening and hopefully learning and having, hopefully constructive conversations? Or is their presence going to, speaking of equity, be a distraction, a threat, etc., to certain people? So it was questions like that. And in addition to just affirming who our ecumenical partners are, and raising awareness about organizations like Churches Uniting that I had never heard of, but I look forward to future partnership with. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's what we did. But it was who has a seat at the table, and again, quick to say everybody, but then when you really get down to it, it was a great example of saying everybody, but it's not easy work.
Thank you, Rich. Alec?
So Yeah, so I was on the ordination committee. It was interesting. In general, highlight a lot of the challenges that are facing, and like I said this in my video, and everybody will see it. It was an interesting learning experience for me because um, a lot of the issues that are happening in rural parts of America, where a lot of small churches are struggling with retaining ministers, or part-time ministers, and it gets into a bigger topic of with people going into seminary as well, because a lot of these rural churches sometimes do not have ministers for years. So there was a discussion about elders stepping up to hold services, and how will we mentor those elders to make sure those services would adhere to the Presbytery way. So it became sort of a catch-22 situation where if you have a lot of elders stepping up and holding the Sunday services in some of these rural churches, then if you have too many, then then you may have less people going into seminary, and there will be less demand for people to become ordained and to serve at these churches. And then we got into a pretty heated discussion about a lot of it has to do with the Presbytery pension system and the benefits, and how that has gotten so expensive where many of the small rural churches just cannot afford a full-time minister. And there was a discussion that, obviously they're purposely hiring part-time to avoid the benefits costs. It goes into a bigger discussion that was happening at the General Assembly as well. But there is a tremendous amount of demand for churches to have ministers, and they're seeing a decline in people going into ministry. And it's a lot more outreach that needs to go out. It's a lot more, and it's a lot more conversation that needs to be had. So that's kind of what we did on our committee.
Hmm. Would you like to say anything? And again, I didn't prep you as I might have, on the overture from Highlands Presbytery. Was that not on your committee?
Yeah, it was.
Hmm.
Can you tell me which one it
Sure.
was?
It was the one about reviewing the preparation for ministry process, the exam process.
Yes, yes. So there was a lot of discussion about the exam process that came from the Highlands, and what went into that process. And it wasn't a big discussion throughout our committee, but it was also interesting to learn that the exam process in different presbyteries is a little bit different. And this brought up a good point into kind of setting up a standard process nationally, between all the different presbyteries, and allowing some of the challenges that occur with the exams, and how to have other people also get involved into ministry, and to have the flexibility on some of the exams and whatnot. So that was not the most glaring conversation to have, but it was definitely a good discussion.
Thank you, Alec. Ultimately, what happened is that there is an ongoing discussion on ordination as a whole in the denomination. And so, where the Highlands Overture ended up is kind of being folded into the work of that broader study. I mean, the upside is it's still there to be talked about. The downside is it's talked about with 50 other things, and so you don't really know. But I guess one possibility in all of this is, at the assembly, I was elected to the committee that does the examination process. And so at the very least, Highland's voice will be heard because
Right.
I'll be there to be annoying.
Does that mean you're going to be on PCCEC?
Yes, yes.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you all voted to make it happen, so thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's to be continued.
Robin, your committee and any things you'd like to share from it.
Or I served on General Assembly procedures. And what the irony of it, it was the same committee I was on 10 years ago. So I thought it was interesting to end up on the same committee twice. So what took the bulk of our time was we had a 90-page document where they were revising the standing rules for General Assembly. So we had in front of us the old document, and there had been a committee that had been selected at the last General Assembly to work through it. So there were things that were outdated, like there was something in it about telegrams. How many of we sell telegrams these days? Doesn't really happen. But, just so really kind of updating it, adding in language of things that have changed over the years and how we do things. I will say it was difficult to work in a large committee on a document that large. And I would say I'm one of the people that really would have liked to have committee meetings in person, because we broke out into small groups, but there wasn't a way for us then to discuss it with another group that was discussing the same thing. So it just got a little bit hard. And our committee was the last to finish. We finished about 11-12 p.m. on Thursday night. Some committees finished on Wednesday or Thursday morning, but it took us a while. The other part that probably took longer than we expected was, where will the next General Assembly be? It's going to be in Milwaukee. The bulk of that discussion was because there was a lot of people who felt on our committee that they really wanted to have the committee meetings in person. And so it actually only passed by one vote about having in Milwaukee in our committee. So one of the things that happens when you're discussing things that might have a cost is you have a person that comes in and talks to you about the financial implications. The financial implications was about $1 million that would add to the budget, which would be approximately $1 per capita for everybody. So that's how we would find out whenever a committee would present something and it would change the budget. We would know how much would it affect the per capita budget, how much it might raise it. And also at this point, because of them already going through the whole process with Milwaukee, they wouldn't have the space for us to have committee meetings there in person. So that would be something that as they go forward, they'd have to figure out, if we're going to do it in person, does the hotel or convention center or whatever have the space that you could have all these committee meetings that have 50, 60 plus people in them? So, again, because I like all the parliamentary stuff and procedures, it was probably a good fit for me, even though, like I said, it was my second time around.
Well, you mentioned time, and you mentioned this was your second time around. And we talked a little bit about it before we went live, but you became a little bit of a celebrity. And would you like to share the story of what you did?
So when we arrived on Wednesday, which was our last full day of the assembly, one of the things they put up on the screen in front of us that said we had done 51% of the work and we only had 25% of the time left. Which means, we've been there Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. We did half of the work and took up 75% of the time. That morning, we got through 2 overtures or 2, whatever they were. I'm not sure if they were overtures or amendments. And there still was a lot to go, including my committee. And so at that point, throughout the process, each person had 2 minutes to speak. At the end of your 2 minutes, kind of cut off. And so I'm thinking all that we had to do yet, we're never going to get done today if we continue to speak 2 minutes. So I and we broke for lunch, and at lunch I spoke to make sure I had the right procedure of how to make a proposal to change our time for speaking to 1 minute. And I will tell you, you know how you practice things. So I practiced it over and over in my head, got up there and I said it. And it was very honest. I love hearing people's stories, but we were running out of time, and also said, my committee has not spoken yet. So, I understand that, how we all want to speak. And what was interesting is the moderator that was speaking at the time said, and she did that in 1 minute. So I was under 1 minute when I spoke. But I will tell you, my friends, when I sat down, my heart was pounding and I was shaking like a leaf. But I held it together during it. Many people came up to me later and said, thank you, because also concerned, about the amount of work that we had in front of us, about being able to get it done and really doing it while we still had enough freshness and energy, intelligence, and all that we have.
Well, and thanks to Robin and stepping up, even though it was anxiety producing, this assembly actually finished up in great time. I've been to assemblies where the last night we were there till midnight or later, and this one ended on time. It was wonderful. So thank you, Robin. On behalf of a grateful General Assembly, thank you. Craig, your committee and things you'd like us to know.
Yes, okay. I was on the Environmental and Earth Care Committee, and I first said, why in heaven's name or in computer randomization name am I on this committee this time around? Well, I found that the Spirit had both educating to do in my awareness and what have you. There were two major overtures in the what's called the ENV committee. One was called Overture number 2, and the other was Overture number 6. Basically, what Overture number 2 proposed was a total divestment or a cessation of funding stocks. And you would say, Presbyterian Church holds stocks? Oh, yes, we do. Presbyterian Foundation and I'm blanking, Foundation, and who also holds our purse strings for that? Presbyterian Foundation. Okay.
Help?
Yeah.
Presbyterian Investment and Loan Program?
Yeah, I believe so. But we do, as a denomination, hold stock, and although not a major proportion, a significant proportion is in oil-producing companies and plastics-producing companies. And what ENV2 proposed was a total divestment from these companies and reinvestment in more ecologically sound investments. And then what I didn't realize is that we have part of our denomination a committee called MRTI, which stands for Mission Responsibility Through Investment. And basically their interest or charge is to have a seat at shareholder tables for companies that do things that we as a denomination may feel are ethically or morally wrong. And the other overture 6, was specific targeted divestment with the 10 worst offenders in this field. Well, what happened on one day in General Assembly is that we approved ENV2, and then I guess we slept on it, and somebody brought up as basically an emergent resolution to say, on the other hand, and more testimony was received, and the very next morning we rescinded what we had approved the previous day. So ultimately ENV2 did fail, but ENV6, which was a more selected divestment, did stand or did uphold. I think the good that came out of this was a general knowledge that we do have an arm of our denomination called MRTI, and to hold them to greater accountability to how they engage with these companies and what the results of their engagement is, and reporting back to us. I think that will be the long-term benefit to my work on ENV. The people who were overture advocates, from Presbyterians for Earth Care, super people, and they had some very legitimate points. But in terms of the will of General Assembly, ENV2, the Assembly had a change of heart, and it did not pass. But I still think it's good that MRTI is now on our radar.
I do not work with the finances of the presbytery any more than I'm asked to, so I don't know how Highlands works. But many presbyteries use the MRTI guidelines to shape their investments. And if you do invest through PILP or through the foundation, they're bound by certain structures. And that's part of the argument, is how much should they be bound, and other things. But MRTI's voice is one that every presbytery can be listening to. And we could certainly find out, if you were interested, on whether that's how our investments in this presbytery are made.
Can I add something, please? One of the things that I also got out of this ENV2 and things, one of the arguments was, if we totally divest from whatever it is, whether it's Israel or whatever, we lose our seat at the table to make changes. And I think that's what really swayed people. By keeping a seat at the table, we can maybe affect some changes along the way. And so I think that really changed a lot of people's minds on whether we should totally divest or just partially, or what we should do.
Valid point, Robin. Excellent point. Yes.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank you all for answering my questions, but we have a whole room full of people that may have their own. And so at this time, I'd like to open up the floor, but because, as we've heard, when you have a lot of faces on one little Zoom screen, it can be hard to see everybody. So if you could raise your Zoom hand, I will call on you. I'm sure not as efficiently as they did at the General Assembly, but as best I can. In theory, your Zoom hand should move you to the top of my screen. But if you're hitting your Zoom hand and I'm not calling on you, just unmute and say, "Here I am." Lisa Gray.
Thank you for calling on me. Never let it be said, I'm always first in the food line, and I can be first to say something. I was a delegate at 222 for environmental, and that was when we were frustrated with MRTI not taking aggressive enough stances. So it's interesting to see how it has progressed. Thank you for taking up the torch, Craig. And I know our presbytery and our synod has divested from fossil fuels.
Well, one of the interesting things was, kind of as a rationale for this ENV02, was that we have successfully invested in cigarette producers. We have successfully divested in certain selected forms of military hardware. We have divested in terms of gun hardware. And it basically was Presbyterians for Earth Care notion that the next major step, by the way, as Hurricane Beryl was barreling through at the same time, that we need to make the same type of total divestment from petroleum products and non-renewable plastics. But yet at the same time, I totally concur with what Robin said, namely, if you cut off all investments and you do not use MRTI as your lobbying arm, then you don't have a seat at the table in terms of affecting corporate change.
Well, thank you, Lisa, for the question, and thank you all for the response. We have Wendy Deutsch.
Yes, hi. I have a question for Robin. I guess I'm kind of a nerd as a clerk, about procedures. When do you anticipate that 90-page report being streamlined and rewritten and available as new rules?
I don't know.
Okay.
Uh,
I mean,
I mean,
everything moves slowly, I realize.
Well, so it will only be standing rules for General Assembly. So it doesn't affect our presbytery or sessions.
Mhm.
But it was passed, so it probably is available already. And if you send me your email, I could probably even get it to you. But yeah, I don't know when something like that, if it gets published or how that works.
Yeah.
Do you know, Steve?
Yeah.
Well, I think some of your colleagues mentioned earlier PC Biz and MyGA, and
Oh.
those are open to anybody who wants to get on them. You could
Mhm.
get on them tonight if you wanted.
Mhm.
The access you had to different kinds of information during the assembly varied on what your role was.
Right.
So if you were at home, not a commissioner, you would see some things, whereas our 4 commissioners would see all kinds of other things. But if you go to PC Biz or MyGA and you look up, what was the name of your committee again, Robin?
General Assembly Procedures, or GAP.
General GAP. If you look that up and you just get on that page, it has all of their actions, and it will have the final report, although it may have a lot of editing marks in it,
Yeah.
because those are part of the record as well.
Mhm.
So you could see it. As Robin said, it only applies to the General Assembly.
Right.
But I think things like that actually go into effect as soon as they're voted on, because they're already working on Milwaukee and they've got to follow the new rules
Correct.
to do that.
Yeah.
So, but it's there if you want to look for it.
Thank you. Yeah, I
Sure.
attended, I think Craig and I were there the first time when it was in Pittsburgh. And it was, I'd go back, not because of Pittsburgh, but just because of the better things that are happening. But okay, thank you very much.
Although, because it's in Pittsburgh is never a bad reason, but that isn't going to be for a while. Do we have any other questions from anybody? Deke Parzon. Deke?
Yes. Were there any overtures relating to the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th and the Israeli response in Gaza over the last 9 months?
Well, would you consider, I'm going to defer to Steve on this, in the sense of, do you consider the overture that denounced Christian Zionism as being relevant to that?
I think that would be different. That was more of a comment on the American political system and the dangers of Christian Zionism. But I would say that the committee I served as committee assistant was called the Christian Formation Committee, and we dealt with electing presidents of seminaries and a new curriculum and things of that sort. But one of our hottest button issues was what was called a commissioner's resolution, which means once you're all as there as the plenary, if two or more commissioners meet and say, you know what we should do, they can, as the Spirit moves them, create something that has not gone through the presbyteries. And they can say, we think we should do this. And then there's a process by which that becomes business. I'm sorry, it doesn't, not when we're in plenary, when we're still in committee. And so while we were in committee, a commissioner's resolution came to the Christian Formation Committee that I was staffing, and it was asking for seminaries to release their investment list with an eye toward companies that were, in their mind, assisting the Israeli military in its actions in Gaza. And I'm not going to name any names because I don't remember for sure. But again, you can look that up under the Christian Formation Committee. And the request was that a divestment take place. And in the end, that did not pass. But it was quite a fertile conversation, both in committee and then at the plenary. Even though it had not been passed in our committee, it had been voted down. But in the intricacies of parliamentary procedure, voting something down isn't enough. You actually have to vote it down. And so a whole second step is involved. Rich, are you raising your hand to comment?
I just want to say it was very helpful to have international guest speakers, and was the president of the World Council of Churches, am I correct there? Who spoke about the work and our support of them and the work that they are trying to do in the Middle East. And in terms of affirming the partnership, the connectionalism that we have, it was great to, there wasn't any specifics necessarily on that, but just to affirm that they're there and our support of what they are doing is trying, making a difference. So just want to share
There
that.
was also, sorry, there was also on the International Engagement Committee, there was a resolution or a recommendation for us to provide educational resources, seeking ways to end Israeli apartheid and looking for ways, discussing why Palestine matters and the struggle to end colonialism and things like that. So it wasn't quite as directed as you said with Hamas and Israel, but there was some discussion that came up under international.
Thank you, Robin. Donna Rahman.
Yes, thanks, Steve. Just to confirm what Robin said, as a Synod Commissioner, I received a document called Actions of the General Assembly mentioning mid-councils, and INT-06, paragraph 2, specifically reiterated what Robin said, that they urge the members, congregations, presbyteries, etc., to seek appropriate ways to bring an end to Israel apartheid, including equipping Presbyterians with knowledge of the Israeli laws and policies that constitute apartheid, with the following understandings, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you for affirming that, Robin. And hope that that answers Deke's question.
Thank you. Do we have any other hands to raise? Questions to ask? Are you applauding, Lisa?
No, I was going to ask a question.
Okay.
I have a new program for this and it does more than it used to do. So I didn't even know I could applaud. So that's kind of, anyway, I just wanted to know how heated was the debate about the inclusive with the transgender people? I know it passed.
Yeah. You know what, I have to say, from my point, the stories that people told, they touched your heart. And so that was when, we had our 2 minutes still. People speaking about how either they had been accepted by their church or not accepted by their church. And I think I've attended many general assemblies or parts of them as an observer. And I've never seen the young adult advisory delegates speak as much as they did at this one. And I think part of that has to do with them raising the age a little bit because it used to be 16. And the wisdom that they shared, like, I don't feel it was heated. That's my opinion. I've been observing or part of when discussion really got out of control, in my opinion. And that had to be brought back, time of prayer or song or whatever. I mean, not everybody was for it. I mean, even though it passed, but I felt that everybody was very respectful. That's the word I would use. And I don't know what other people's opinions might be.
I would echo that. And I think the emphasis on the equity primes, and kudos to our new moderators. They did an excellent job at not just keeping the parliamentary procedures moving, but pausing when we needed prayer to just remind us to stop, take a deep breath, really listen and respect one another. And that was very powerful. So I didn't feel like there was any heat really at all. It was very a lot of love. It was a family meeting, but a lot of love.
Alec or Craig, do you have anything you'd like to
Yeah,
say?
I'll add something. Um, I think specifically from the stories of the folks from the trans community, and sharing some of the hurt that they've gone through in their churches and how they're still remaining as part of the church and having a sort of a new experience with the church than what they've sort of lived through as a child, was really an eye opener. And also I think it set into a lot of people's hearts, because that's not what the church is designed for or was designed for, and it was an isolated experience that they had, and how that they're being accepted, and how everybody at General Assembly was so open with love and open arms and whatnot, was really was really sort of breathtaking. So yeah, I'll share some of that.
I would agree. It was a much more loving and reconciling tone when the Olympia overture, which was the catalyst overture, came to the floor. You also have to remember that we as a denomination are not the same denomination that we were 10 years ago or 12 years ago when LGBTQ matters came before the plenary. Wendy and I were at a plenary wherein it was quite heated. But again, we had it as a denomination, and hopefully us as a society are at a very different, more progressive, more tolerant, more inclusive place. So, and I also think that the those who were building credibility and steam for the Olympia Overture also did their homework well. So by the time it got to the plenary floor, the process went well. The other thing, right quick, about personal testimonies, along with the LGBTQIA people, was the gun I don't know if overture amendment. I am not sure, but one of our statements, one of the very last things we did as a piece of business was to formally denounce gun violence and take some concrete measures in restricting the illegal use of firearms. It was not a total ban on guns, but rather just more into the lines of gun control. And we had some heart-wrenching stories of people who have lost loved ones. And I saw actually one of our co-moderators well up and really, I'm sure that they had a parishioner or two that were unfortunate recipients of gun violence. So we were a much more compassionate assembly on both of those matters.
And to the gun violence issue, I'll just add that we were sent home with the commission to do more to protect our children from gun violence. That was
Amen.
the specific focus for us with some concrete action.
Amen. A specific charge for sure.
Any other questions? Sue, I don't know if you're praising the Lord or asking a question.
It says raised hands. I can't find one hand to raise. I don't usually have to raise my hand to speak. Not a question. I just wanted to thank the four of you for so ably representing Presbytery of the Highlands at the GA, and also for taking the time to share your experiences with us. It's really interesting to hear and very enlightening to me, because I haven't ever had any experience of GA before. So thank you very much indeed, the four of you.
Certainly welcome, Sue, and I hope you put your name in 2 years. Truth be told, I don't believe, unless the Spirit moves me otherwise, I'm not going to put my name in being a commissioner, but I would love to be called to be one of the worker bees that work behind the scenes, possibly a committee assistant like Steve and also like Joe Martinoni did, or one of the tech worker bees like our own Stephen Choi did. So that's where I feel I'm called when it comes to Milwaukee. But thank you,
Great
Sue.
to hear.
Thank you, Sue. I don't see any other hands, and so I would echo Sue's thanks to the four of you. The service you did in preparation and then in Salt Lake City. And to be honest, Rich, you mentioned the commissioning that's been laid upon you to bring back to us. And, that's something that I hope the four of you, having been commissioned, I would be glad for a conversation where we think about how we move forward with that. So I hope that's a conversation that we can carry on into the future. Thank you all again. This will be available online within the next week or so at the latest. There'll also be a whole series of links to other articles and points of information for you, and you can go back and read those items as you feel led to share with your sessions. And my guess is there's still a number of decisions to be made, no earlier than November, but sometime in 2025 at the latest. We have a number of amendments to vote on, including the POL1 that was just asked about, but a number of other things. And so this is not over. And in fact, our commissioners may be in a position to help as we have to unpack and discern what it is God is calling us to do, individually and as a presbytery. So thank you again. And in closing, I offer this benediction. Friends, find God in everyone and in everything. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor, not just in words and speech, but in spirit and truth and action. Be who God made you to be, and know that you are loved, secure in the knowledge that the love of God and the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the communion of the Holy Spirit are with you now and will be forevermore. Amen.